All right, friends, I've gotten a request for making bread. I make a lot of bread, and I have decided I would start with one of the easiest loaves of bread because this one does not require kneading. Kneading dough can be tricky. You have to get a feel for it. You have to know when the dough is pliable enough. But thankfully, this particular loaf of bread that I'm going to make is a basic no-knead crusty loaf. And the amount of dough that I'm going to be making will let you make multiple loaves of bread during the week. This recipe is actually from King Arthur flour. I have to tell you that King Arthur flour has the best bread baking recipes for basically anything with flour on the internet. It's just such good recipes. But I'm going to take you through making this recipe. I'm just going to mix the ingredients tonight, and I'm just going to stick the bowl right in the refrigerator overnight, and it'll be ready for baking tomorrow. So stick with me and we'll get right to it. All right, so I have this giant bowl here, and I'm going to need this because, as I said, I'm making enough dough in this no-knead crusty bread recipe for making 3 or more loaves of bread, depending on how you divvy it up. And I'll tell you that when I make this bread, I sometimes make it for one big loaf, and I'll make 3 big loaves, or I'll make smaller loaves. I've actually made crusty bread bowls to serve my broccoli cheddar soup in, which I will do in a video with the dough from this batch later this week. So the first ingredient is going to be obviously flour. So it's going to take 7.5 cups of flour. This is 7.5. So there's 7.5 cups of flour, a tablespoon of salt, there's a tablespoon of salt, 1.5 tablespoons of yeast. Now this is one thing I'm going to tell you. Those little packets of yeast that you buy have 2.25 teaspoons in each packet. If you can, buy a jar of yeast, like the little jars of Fleischmann's yeast, or if you have a membership to Sam's Club or something like that, just go in and buy some yeast in bulk, because you'll be glad you have it. You can keep one. The ones at Sam's Club come to a package. They actually come in nice size packages, so you can keep one put up in the cabinet nice and sealed, and then you can put the other one into a jar and keep it in your refrigerator, which is what I do, and that works out really well. So 1.5 tablespoons of yeast, kind of estimating that's half a tablespoon. And now I need to add 3 cups of lukewarm water. Now this is very important. When you're baking bread, you do not want to add hot water to the dough. You don't want to do cold water either, because that won't really get the yeast going. But lukewarm water means it's going to be just slightly warm to your touch, because your body temperature is around 98.6 degrees, give or take. So it's going to be a few degrees higher than that, but once you go past like 110 degrees, then you're in danger of starting to kill the yeast, and you don't want to do that. So 3 cups of lukewarm water. There's 1. 2. And 3. Now I'm just going to get this all stirred together. This is it, y'all. This is it. You just mix this dough up just like this. You make sure everything gets mixed together really well. And then I'm going to cover it and put it in the refrigerator. So hang on so you can see how I do this. And you can of course do this in a mixer if you want, but since this is one of those things I'm mixing in this big bowl here, since I'm going to be storing it in the big bowl, I'd rather just mix it in the big bowl because I'm not a fan of washing dishes. I don't have a dishwasher, so I'm the dishwasher. So anytime I can save dishes, you can bet that's what I'm going to do. So in this case, I'm just mixing this myself. I'll probably get in just with my hand just for a minute just to make sure everything is incorporated really well. But could not be easier, especially since you get multiple loaves of bread out of this. And this is a really good tasting bread. And when it's time to bake, I'm going to tell you some tricks for getting your loaves nice and crusty. And you can, of course, depart from some of the things that I'm going to show you. But I'm going to show you the way I do it. And then I'll tell you some other options. I've chosen to do things the way I do because that's what gets me the very best results. All right. All right, I'm going to work this with my hands for just a minute just to get everything else incorporated, but I'm not really kneading it. It's not going to hurt it if I knead it a little bit, but with this recipe, it's just not necessary. Mostly I'm just doing this to sort of pinch everything together. I think that's got everything incorporated. And they don't say that you have to do this, so you don't have to do this, but something that I do is I'll usually rub a little bit of oil inside the bowl just to make it easier when it's time to take some dough out. And then when you do go to grab some of this dough for baking, you'll just get some flour on your hand and yank off part of it, or you can use like a pastry cutter to cut it and just lop off a piece. A lot of different ways, but anyway, I'm just going to get a little bit of olive oil and rub it around the inside of my bowl. I've just got it on my hands because I'm not trying to get it into the dough. This is not a dough that really has oil. This is just me trying to make sure that the dough is not going to stick to the inside of the bowl too much. And it probably won't. They don't even say to do this on the King Arthur site, but I guess it's just habit. Because whenever I make bread and I'm going to leave it in a bowl to proof, I'm pretty much always adding some oil to the bowl. So all right, so there we go. So I've got this lid for this bowl, which is great. I'm just going to pop this in the fridge, let this rest overnight, and then tomorrow I'll take some out before lunchtime and usually give it about an hour or if it's really cool in the house, around 2 hours to come up to room temperature before I bake it. So I'll be back. Alrighty, so it's the next day and I have gotten this big old bowl out of my refrigerator and I'm going to show you this dough. It expanded overnight. You can keep this dough in your refrigerator for up to 7 days. At the end of 7 days, it's going to be pretty tangy, as if you were making a sourdough loaf. I've never had this happen. It says in the recipe on the King Arthur site that as you have the dough in the refrigerator, it might rise and fall, and that's fine. But right now, I'm going to pull off a lump of this dough because I'm going to bake up a loaf of this bread for supper tonight. My brother and his family is coming over, and so I want us to have a nice hot loaf of bread to enjoy. Crusty bread, it's going to be good. So I'm going to get a little bit of flour and sprinkle on top of the loaf because that'll help make it easier to grab some. And I've got a little bit of olive oil back here. I'm just going to grease my hands with some olive oil. And let's see, this is a pretty good size ball of dough. I'm probably going to just go ahead and grab about 1/3 of it. And it's deflating even as I grab it, so that's fine. Because it's going to puff back up once I get it on the parchment there. All right. So basically, I'm just going to make a nice ball out of this, and I'm going to leave this to sit here on this piece of parchment for as long as it takes to get this up to temperature, room temperature. And what's going to happen is it's not going to get taller as much as it's just going to spread out. It's going to spread out on the parchment and just get wider. And then it'll be time to put it in the oven. Let me get this angled down so you can see. So, as I mentioned, this is not going to come up in height. It's going to sort of spread out, and as it rises, and then once it does get to room temperature and it's ready to bake, I'm going to slash a couple of slices in the top and a couple of slashes in the top. And then I'll also explain to you what you need to do to get that crusty texture inside your oven. So I'll bring you back. All right, so here's what I did. It's actually kind of cool in the house because it's such a cold winter day. And so I put this in my dehydrator on the lowest temperature because I needed to go ahead and get this up to room temperature before in time so I could bake it before my brother and his family come over for supper. So you know, if you're going to just let this bread come to room temperature in your house, it might take up to 2 hours if it's cold, if it's kind of cold or cool in your house. But on a warm day, it might take under an hour. And I will tell you, it's not totally up to room temperature under the bottom of the loaf, but most of it is room temperature. It feels pretty good, and you can see that it has definitely expanded since I put it on the paper. It kind of spread out just like I mentioned. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to give it a couple of slashes in the top, and then I have had a pan of water, a pan in the bottom of the oven, and it's been getting hot along with the oven, which I have on 450 degrees. I'm going to pour a cup of water in that pan when I put the bread in, and then I'm going to quickly close the door and let the steam go to work on the outside of this dough, because that's what's going to give it that really gorgeous crust. So let me go ahead and give this a couple of slashes on the top, and then I'm going to use my pizza peel to put it in the oven. And this is another thing. I'm going to be baking this on a breadstone. I absolutely love a breadstone. I recommend it. My son gave me one for Mother's Day year before last. I love it. I'm a big fan of making bread and pizza and all kinds of things. And I just keep the breadstone in my oven all the time. The trick with that is you want to get it hot before you put bread on it to bake. That's the way to do it. And so anyway, so I've got the breadstone ready. Like I say, I'm going to go ahead and put a couple of slashes in the top of this. I'm going to use the pizza peel here to get it in the oven. Pour in some water into that pan, and then it'll be ready to bake, and it'll bake for about 35 minutes. I just had to get some water ready real quick. And I'm just making a couple of quick, purposeful slashes, just like that. I'm going to go ahead and take this water right here and pour it in that pan. And I'm going to get this bread in there. And that's it. That's going to bake for about 35 minutes, and I'll bring you back when it's done. All right, there it is, friends. A nice, delicious loaf of crusty bread, no knead. This is super easy to make, and it's delicious. I'm going to let this come down in temperature a little bit before serving. Slice it up with some, and spread it on with some butter. Okay, at this point, my brother and his family arrived, and I just had to go ahead and cut the bread. I wanted to let it just rest some more, because you know what, when you take a loaf of bread like this out of the oven, it continues to bake even on the counter as the temperature is coming down. So you don't generally want to cut bread like this when it's hot. But they were here, and I needed to go on upstairs and get this bread sliced and ready to serve. So you can see I'm doing that here. I would have left the sound effects on, but my adorable nephew's in the background talking to my little animals, and he's just having a good time. So I figured I would just give this little bit of voiceover, but I think you can see that the outside of this is pretty crusty. You see those crumbs coming off the edges. And anyway, if you do make this, I do recommend you just let it set until it comes to room temperature or pretty close to it before you cut it. And then you can serve it up, and it's going to be absolutely delicious. In addition, this same recipe can be used to make bread bowls for a nice thick soup like a broccoli and cheese soup or a clam chowder or something like that, and it's so good. So I hope you enjoyed this recipe, and I hope you make it. And if you do, let me know what you think in the comments below. I thank you so much for watching. See you again soon. Bye-bye.